All right, so let's move on to our first presentation. Our first speaker is Daniel Cybulskie, Solutions Consulting Manager from Zscaler. And Daniel has the Zscaler Solutions engineering team in Canada with over 15 years experience in information security. He has a broad technical background ranging from route switch, identity and PKI, encryption, wireless networking, permission management, and now cloud security. And then we'll talk about how over-reliance on DLP, data loss prevention, is hurting your data protection efforts. It's a very interesting topic.
Okay, so thank you, Brian. This is actually my second time at Cyber Tech and
Yes,
Risk, and I think you were saying it's time flies. I think it was 2019 or 2020 was the
2020,
last
yeah.
time, yeah, that I was here. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be back speaking with you and everybody. And I want to thank everybody for carving out the time. What? For carving out the time to spend some time with me. Sorry, Zoom just decided to take over my window. Technical difficulties, right? So a little bit more on the background that's going to be relevant to this discussion, right? So right now I'm coming with a perspective of someone who's, street on the feet. I'm working with our customers and our prospects on a daily and weekly basis to help them implement, cloud migrations and zero trust networking and modernization of their remote workforce and things like that. And uh, a lot of times what happens in these discussions is as organizations decide they want to go down that route, which I agree we should be going down that route. um, they got to figure out, okay, well, what should we be concerned about? And obviously data we should be concerned about. And they say, as we go there, we're opening ourselves up to a lot of risk because there's a lot more potential for our data to spread around. So we need to approach this from a data protection standpoint. So they say, you know what, we're gonna focus on DLP and make sure that we've got everything that we need on DLP, and that's going to be the tip of the spear for how we go down this route. And prior to my time at Zscaler, I spent 6 years doing data protection DLP work specifically. So this is near and dear to my heart. And if I accomplish anything today, I'm hoping not to go super deep, but to at least in the next 20 to 25 minutes, get everybody at least thinking about how over reliance on that DLP story when you're looking at those cloud migrations and modernization and zero trust networking um, plans is ultimately going to hurt your data protection effort and cause you a lot more pain than you think it is, right? So to tell that story, I'm a big fan of analogies. And I thought, okay, well, what better form of analogy than just switching stuff to a physical analogy, and maybe in honor of our other event sponsor, RBC, right? I thought, well, let's say I'm going to protect my bills. I've got fat stacks of cash here, and I'm gonna protect them. So let's build an analogy that way. And anytime I want to build an analogy, I go to my analogy expert, which is my children, and I said, you know what? Hey, I've got an analogy. I've got something for you guys. You guys are now my bankers. I've got piles of money here. How are you going to protect it? Tell me how you're going to protect my money. And they said, well, they had some good ideas and they had some surprising ideas. They said, well, we're gonna put your money in a vault, right? Okay, great. I've got a vault. Tell me about this vault. What's it made of? And I said, well, it's going to be made of steel, really thick steel walls so that nobody can drill through it. Perfect. I like it so far. What else have we got? They said, well, the floor and the roof are also going to be steel, so you can't just go over or under the walls. It's the whole thing is steel. Perfect. Tell me about the door. Well, it's thick and it's got 2 locks on it, right? It's got 2 keys and 2 separate people have the keys. And for a 12-year-old to say that was pretty surprising, but 2 separate people have the keys. She's talking about collusion without really knowing it, right? And, both people need to be present to open this thing. I said, that's great. What else? Well, it's tamper resistant. They can tell when someone's trying to pick the lock. And if someone tries to pick the lock, it'll really lock down and send an alarm to someone to let them know that someone's trying to break into the vault. And I said, is that it? That's what we got? And I said, well, we're going to have, you can see inside here. That's why I picked this specific image. Inside, we're going to take the money and we're not just going to store it on a big table in the middle. We're going to divide it up into individual lockers, and each of those is going to have a lock on it too. So even if you get in the vault, you're not getting all the money. You're just getting a little bit of the money. And the last thing they said, which was the most surprising to me, was, well, we're going to electrify it, right? So if someone touches this thing outside of the hours they're supposed to be opening the vault, they're going to get electrocuted. Okay, well, that's a good security mechanism, I guess. And after that, we cleaned the plate, and they said that's how we're going to protect your money. Okay, perfect. That's a good analogy for the way we think about data protection today when we focus too much on just DLP, right? They focused on the vault, but what they didn't focus on was the rest of the stuff that has to happen for the person, the intruder, the offender, the person who wants to take this money to actually get in front of the vault to try to break into it, right? They didn't think about, what about the front door to the bank? We're going to put a lock on that. Maybe we're also going to put security cameras on that. We're going to put a security guard at the front door of the bank. Maybe it's not welcoming, but it's very secure, right? And we're going to have cameras just on the front of the bank itself to watch, who's driving up and casing the joint during the day or the weeks preceding an attack. And when they get inside, maybe there's another security guard. There's an alarm system, a loud alarm system. There's a quiet alarm system. There's a counter with a teller, and you got to get past the teller, and there's a door stopping you from getting past the teller in that case, right? Exactly. I see a comment from Marcos, right? Defense in depth for the win. But they didn't think about all that. They focused on the vault, right? Which is typically the analogy that I like to think about when people focus too much just on DLP and they forget the rest of the stuff that has to happen. And so what I want to maybe talk through in the rest of the time we've got is, what is the rest of the stuff and why shouldn't we forget it? Why is this? There we go. Right. So let's play some DLP bingo, right? This is typically how it happens. I call it DLP bingo, right? They come to me, I'm working with people, and they say, well, we need a bunch of stuff in our DLP. Let's start going down and knocking off the features that our DLP engines need to have. And by no means is this going to be an exhaustive list of DLP functionality. We can spend an entire day just talking about functions in DLP products. That's not the point, Dave. But they'll say things like, well, we got to be able to do regex, right? We have to be able to put in some expressions that roughly describe our data that we're trying to protect. Credit cards is a common one. We need some regexes, and we need some LUN checks to make sure that it actually is a credit card. Great. Yep, we got to be able to have that. Let's put that on our bingo card. We've got to be able to have dictionaries and keyword searches so that we can look for certain terms that we know are going to show up with our protected data. And maybe we need to be able to combine both of those, the regexes and the dictionaries and the keyword searches, into one common engine so that we can say a certain amount of regex hits and a certain number of dictionaries and keyword hits within X number of lines or spaces of the regex hit need to happen before we count that as a hit. Okay, cool. Yep, we'll add that to our bingo card. Maybe we need optical character recognition, right? Because we've got documents that we scan that aren't necessarily indexable, but we know there's stuff on there. People are scanning in documents that they filled out that has sensitive data in it potentially. Cool, add it. We need to be able to potentially label or tag this stuff, or ingest the labels and tags that other people have put on these files, right? And we've got Microsoft here, a great partner of ours who we integrated with, obviously, who does a very good job of that. We need to be able to integrate with those labels as part of our DLP strategy. Cool. Maybe we want a fingerprint. We know that they're going to fill in common documents. What they fill into the documents is obviously going to be different for each individual person, but if we can fingerprint what that document looks like, we'll catch the document regardless of who filled it in and what's in the document. Maybe that's another thing we need to be able to do. And I'll throw one more up there. We need an incident response workflow, right? We need to be able to do something when we get a hit, right? We discover that our DLP engine has discovered that someone is trying to transfer this sensitive data, this protected data that we've got across. We need it to alert people. We need it to store a copy in a secure location. We need the logs dumped to certain people. They need to inspect. The end user potentially needs to be notified. We need to track who owns this and what the disposition of that particular case is, and so on and so forth, right? And again, I'm not going to go through an exhaustive list beyond this, but we build this bingo card, and then eventually we've got a big sheet of features, and we say, okay, if we can find something that can do all this, bingo, right? We've cracked this. We are now safe to go to the cloud. We're ready to do our cloud migration, because our biggest concern was that when we did our cloud migration, our data was going to just go all over the place. And now with a DLP engine that's got all of these features and we can check the box, we are set. Maybe not the case, right? So this is the bank. We've just built that vault, right? This is what we've done here. We've built the vault and we haven't considered anything else. And the things that we haven't considered are why we ultimately lose that bingo. And remember, I've gone through so many DLP projects prior to coming here, and I'm still going through them now. And it's usually the same things that we fail to consider. And these are being exacerbated by obviously remote work, cloud migrations, SaaS platforms being adopted, right? These are just expanding and growing more rapidly, right? Data and application sprawl are long-standing IT issues, right? They were long-standing IT issues back when we just had everything in the data center and it was going from file server to file server, right? If I think about the day in the life of a typical document, right? Someone creates whatever, an Excel document, and they send a link of that document to someone else. They download it because they want to do some stuff and they don't want to mess with the original. So now there's 2 copies of it. They email that off to someone else. That person exports it to a PDF because they don't want it to be changed. All of a sudden, by working and collaborating on this thing, I've created one document with all the sensitive data. I've got 3 or 4, 5, 6, whatever copies of this stuff. So the data itself multiplies, and then the applications that we now ingest that data with have also multiplied as we've gone out to the internet and SaaS platforms, right? So that has been a problem that we've had all along, and it is still a problem that is growing, right? So that's one of the reasons why we fail at bingo when all we do is focus on the vault, or in this case, DLP. The other reason is obviously clouds and data and everywhere, right? And so I've kind of alluded to it in the first point, right? That was a problem when we were just in the data center. Now we go to the cloud, there's clouds everywhere, IaaS and PaaS platforms, SaaS platforms. The data can spread, exponentially to a number of different locations very quickly. And we quickly lose a handle on where that is. And then accidental data loss is a real, and maybe I should have put this in capital letters, growing risk, right? Accidental data loss is, your users have legitimate access to data to be able to do their jobs. And if they have the access to accidentally over permission or overshare, share that out to everyone globally, especially now that we're on global cloud-facing platforms, the risk of accidental data loss grows, right? And so the focusing on the vault doesn't really help us with all of these things, because the problem is growing faster than a single DLP engine can actually help us with. So there's a little bit different way that we need to think about this. I'm not saying don't focus and worry about DLP and make sure that you've got all the features you need. Absolutely do that. But that shouldn't be the spearhead of the conversation, and it shouldn't be the end of the conversation, right? If we take that DLP bubble that I had on screen. I don't know why I'm pointing at my screen because you can't see my hands, but DLP that we had on the screen, and we put it into a little bubble, it's actually a smaller piece of a much larger data protection story that we need to be focused on before we go to the cloud or we go with modern workforce and remote workforce, right? We got to start much, much wider, cast a wider net and figure out, let's focus on shadow IT. What are the applications that people are using? What is sanctioned and what is not sanctioned? We need to get a handle on that, right? If one of the major problems that's stopping DLP from being as effective as it should be is the fact that we don't know which applications they're going to, and we might not even have visibility into some of those applications. If we can stop them from even going to those applications or those resources to begin with, we shrink the problem, like we shrink the scope of the problem, right? And that's the former QSA speaking up in me, right? So shadow IT we need to start there. Then we need to, once we've locked that down, look at a complete data visibility story. Where does our data live now that we've locked out all the shadow IT stuff? Where does it live? And one of the things I always like to stress is DLP is very good at finding data, but that's only about a third of the story that I need before I can actually make decisions. I need to find it. Great. Where is it? But I need to know who has access to it, and I need to know who is supposed to have access to it. And I put that all in the data visibility story, right? I need to be able to paint that picture before I can make an informed and intelligent business decision around what to do with it. This is where we can pull in some out-of-band CASB stuff as we're going to those cloud platforms, right? So the API scans of your data at rest as I move it to, again, we've got Microsoft here, we're going to say Azure, right? As we move it there, OneDrive maybe, I want to figure out which data is there. And again, look at the permissions as it sits there, maybe in just the tags as well. But also look at the security posture of how I've got those platforms configured. And there's a stat I tried to find, but I couldn't find it in time for this. So don't quote me on the exact number, but there was a Gartner stat, and it was something like 80% of cloud data breaches result from misconfiguration. It was something like that. And so if anybody's got that stat handy, maybe send it to me because I can't find it now. But it's not enough to know where the data is and who has permission, but we've got to make sure that the platform itself is configured in a secure way, that it just can't be compromised, and all of our permissions are something that people can easily go around, right? And then the inline stuff. And this is, once I've done all this stuff and I've gone down to the inline, I'm saying these are the platforms they're allowed to access. Now, what are they allowed to do when they get to those platforms, right? And we always pick on social media here, so let's continue to do that, right? They're going to pick on Facebook, right? Maybe I want people to go to Facebook, but I don't want them to be able to write to it in this case, right? So they can access it to read it, cool. They can't write it. So I know that they're not going to leak data out through these social platforms because I'm taking away the ability to write. So I need to get granular on the permissions within these cloud applications, and that's what CASB does. All of this combined, right, is a CASB DLP story. And if there's one message that this slide gets across, hopefully it's that the DLP stuff that we started with, that big feature list, it is the last resort. It's the last line of defense in this data protection story, not the first line of defense, right? DLP engines, I don't care who you talk to, none of them are 100%. I've never worked on a DLP project where we've got the regexes and the dictionary searches and everything so fine-tuned that we can honestly say we've captured 100% of all the true positives without any false positives, right? I could build DLP engines that will catch all the data, but I can promise you I'm going to catch a bunch of stuff that shouldn't be caught as well, right? So if I'm relying only on that last line of defense, some stuff is going to get through. By doing this and making sure I'm whittling down that funnel of what the DLP engine needs to handle, I'm setting myself up for maximum success in a data protection story rather than starting with the vault and having that be my first and last line of defense. Okay. And then if we take a mental snapshot of this right here, our CASB DLP starting at Shadow IT and working its way down to the core DLP functionality, that's actually, again, a much smaller piece of what we would call our approach to data protection, which starts at preventing compromise, preventing lateral movement once people are in the network, and then getting to the DLP side, right? And why is that important? Preventing compromise, right? I've talked about accidental disclosure of data, but obviously they're outside actors, right? They want to get in and compromise inside users' accounts and then do stuff, right? So I need to eliminate the attack surface as much as possible so that there's not a target for people to go after. I've got to have my secure web gateway in place so that, as my end users are legitimately accessing places, they're not getting compromised by those locations. Control which application and content that they need to go to. I need to control advanced threats, things like ransomware protection, obviously, but I need to control 0 days and new attacks. Our Threat Labs team just posted on our blog about a new attack that people are using via Facebook clone accounts and getting people to try to download libraries of adult pictures and whatnot. And the second they click on the link, it's loading EXEs, it's side loading DLLs, and the machine gets compromised and whatnot. So there's always new threats. Outside actors need to be able to get all this stuff and get your users to fall for them and be susceptible to them before they can actually use their machine to move laterally within a network and then steal the data. And that goes to our segmentation piece, right? And data protection is part of it is largely a permissions issue more than an identity of where the data resides issue. And that is end users generally collect permissions over time within an environment, right? When you start and then you get a promotion, you move from department to department, you're gathering those permissions, and it's very hard to take them away or keep track of when to take them away. I used to always say that an end user is very good at complaining when they don't have access to something they need to do their job, but I've never met the end user who complains when they have too much access to something, right? So we need to make sure that we're segmenting off and finding ways to do that. And only then do we actually get to the nut of this fruit, maybe if we say the CASB and the DLP side of things, right? So you said it at the beginning, I forget I think the gentleman's name, defense in depth. We've heard this for, decades. Now, the story doesn't change. It becomes even more important as we go to cloud and mobile workforces. So I think I'm getting close to up on time. Like I said, I just want to get people thinking about it. 20 minutes isn't enough time to deep dive into each one of these specific functions and features. But well, I can't read the comment, but I'll get to it in a second. But happy to have further discussions with anybody. Obviously, you can get in touch with me through Brian, or you can ask a question here now, and hopefully I can answer it, or we can sidebar and find another time to ask it.